have on special guest, Minister Dante Fortson. Minister Dante is a licensed and ordained minister, and he's a published author. His area of expertise is the supernatural. He's an expert in the area of angels, both fallen and good, demons, giants, and vampires. Some of my favorite subjects. And we're going to be talking about one of his new books tonight called The Sons of God in the Coming Apocalypse. So I hope you are ready to go. All right, stand by, folks, and I am going to get Minister Fortson on the line. Minister Fortson, are you on with us tonight?
Yes, I am. How are you tonight?
Really good. God bless you for coming on. And before we get started, I usually like to open up in prayer. Would you be willing to go ahead and open up the show tonight with some prayer?
Oh, sure, definitely.
Praise
God.
Yes,
we'll go ahead. Lord, we come here today to say thank you. We thank you for giving us the opportunity to share your word with anybody that might need to hear it, and we ask that somebody is blessed or touched by this program as you need them to be. We ask these and many more blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Dante, go ahead and give out your websites for those that are tuning in.
Okay, my website is ministerfortson.com, and Fortson is spelled F-O-R-T-S-O-N.
Okay, praise God. And I actually found you in the Blog Talk Radio Network and went over and looked at your page, and, you know, you write the books that I love to read. I love hearing about giants and the Nephilim in Genesis 6. Tell us a little bit about your radio program. How long have you been doing a show?
We actually started doing, well, we had 2 radio programs as of 2 weeks ago. But the Omega Hour is the one we started in February of this year. And, I mean, it's been going really great. We're on, you know, Thursday nights, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on Blog Talk. But that one's been going really great. I mean, we've had some really great guests on the Omega Hour since it started. And through the grace of God, you know, we haven't done too many shows where we haven't had a guest. And the second show that we did, or that we do, comes on every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. on the Freedomizer Network here on Blog Talk Radio, and it's called How to Hunt the Supernatural. And that's the one where myself and my co-host, Brother BJ, we talk about the supernatural. So every other day we cover a different subject of the supernatural, and that's been going good as well.
You know, that's a subject that a lot of people are interested in, not only in the Christian community, but the world at large. You know, people are interested in the supernatural, interested in UFOs. Even on these reality shows, you know, they go out looking for, you know, chasing down spirits, trying to catch them on camera. And as a Christian, I have a particular interest in it because I know that there's only 2 forces out there, folks. You've got light and dark, and these people are chasing after real entities, but if you're not saved, don't know Jesus Christ as your Savior, you might not like what you find when you catch up to some of those things.
Exactly.
So, how did you get interested in this whole subject area of angels and the days of Noah? Take us back to the beginning.
Okay. Excuse me. It started really when I was right before my high school, my freshman year in high school. So I guess that summer of 8th grade was where I really got deep into extraterrestrials. But what led to that interest was my prior interest in ghosts, and then I got into vampires from there. I never was really too much into werewolves, but it was mostly ghosts and vampires. And then around the summer, well, I guess coming out of 8th grade, I developed an interest in aliens, UFOs, and then it was about the summertime is when I really got deep into it and started to just read everything I could find and watch everything I could find. And I believe that was the same time Independence Day was coming out.
Yeah,
Roswell was doing the, yeah, exactly. I love it. I still watch it, and I just even having marathons. But I believe it was Roswell's 47-year anniversary or 50-year anniversary around that time. I'm not sure. I know it was some anniversary they were doing, and so they had a whole bunch of stuff on. And so I started to get real deep into this stuff, and I was reading, you know, things about channeling and, you know, all kinds of weird things. It just kind of draws you in once you, you know, step in a little bit. So I, had read this stuff about people channeling these beings, and now I'm, partway into my ninth grade year. I'm not sure how far it was, but I just remember wanting to get in contact with these beings that I thought were extraterrestrials. And so what I did was I tried to channel them because I realized that,
Wow.
none of these places that were, sending out broadcasts into space and things like that, they weren't making contact, but there were, psychics and channelers and mediums that were. And so I tried to channel them. I had no idea what I was doing. And, now I realize it's not even about knowing how to channel it. It's an invitation that's involved by wanting to commune with these things. But yeah, I tried to channel them, and I didn't think anything happened. And then I remember it was Sunday night, and I had this weird experience. I fell asleep with my lights and TV on, which was weird because I was obsessed with the dark, and this obsession had grown out of all the other stuff I was into, the vampirism especially. And, I had a blanket over my window to block out the sunlight from getting in my room. I was just very, very dark back then. And so I woke up about 3 in the morning. It was actually exactly 3 in the morning, and I remember looking at my clock because the lights on TV were on. And then I heard this buzzing, high-pitched noise outside my window. I looked, and I remember a bright light. And from there, I remember being on my side. And I just remember hearing this drilling-type noise. And it felt like almost like somebody was trying to drill into the back of my head. And then I got this floating sensation. And at this point, I remember all of a sudden this fear came over me, and I could feel these presences in the room. And it was very strange to me because the first thing I thought was, these aren't really aliens. And I remember that was the first thought in my mind. This was before I was ever introduced to the Genesis 6 concept.
Yes.
And I just started praying. It was my reaction to start praying. And it felt like it took about 30 to maybe 45 seconds from beginning to end that everything happened. From the time that I felt the floating sensation and the drilling to the time that it stopped. And so when everything stopped, I just remember laying there for a second. I was scared to open my eyes. And then I finally turned over. It was 3:30, and I didn't lay there that long. I mean, it felt like I was only, laid there for a few seconds just to kind of gather myself. And I looked at my clock. It was 3:30. The lights were off and the TV were off. That's what really scared me and convinced me it wasn't a dream because I didn't get up to turn my TV or my lights off. And nobody came in the room to turn the light off or the TV off. Everybody was asleep in the house.
Uh-oh.
And so this event really scared me. And I mean, it left me with a lasting fear of the dark. And from that moment on, I went from being completely obsessed with aliens as our space brothers and that whole thing to not wanting to have anything to do with these beings. I mean, I took the books that had any kind of alien face on them, and I put them up to where I couldn't see them. And I remember for a while, I didn't even want to read about them. It just kind of, completely turned me off. Anytime I would see something on TV, I would turn away for a while. And, well, that morning, after this event happened, I was scared until the sun came up and I had to go to the bus stop. And I remember all day at school just replaying this entire scenario through my head and wondering, about a few things. Why did I feel an evil presence? Why did they stop when I prayed? I'm thinking these are beings from other planets that are our space brothers and that type of thing. And now I'm, completely fearful of this. And not only that, I could actually feel the dark. The Bible talks about when God sent the plague on Egypt, that he had a darkness that they could feel. And till this day, I can feel the dark, and I've never was able to do that before then. If I'm asleep and I wake up, if somebody turns off all the lights, I'll wake up because the lights are off. And even if it's only for maybe 30 or 40 seconds, I'll wake up if those lights go out. Because I don't know how to explain how it feels, but I can actually feel the dark now. So this is when I really started to seek answers after I asked those questions. For a couple of months, I didn't want to come home by myself. And so what I would do is if I had to be by myself, I would open the front door and the back door. Now, I'm a freshman in high school, so, I'm about 15, 16, close to, grown. And I'm scared to be in the house by myself, and so I would let the dogs come in. And one rule I did have is I would never go upstairs by myself. At least for 2 months, I didn't go upstairs by myself until somebody got home. I wouldn't do it if I was in the house by myself. And so it scared me that bad, and that it stuck with me. And so now I can't even sleep in the dark because of the feeling I get when I sleep in the dark. I don't like the way the dark feels. So I started to seek answers, and I ran across a tape called Return of the Nephilim by Chuck Missler.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I listened to it. Yeah, I mean, this was back when Firefighters for Christ was sending out cassette tapes still.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I listened to this, and, you know, it kind of, you know, didn't catch at first, but I found it interesting, so I listened to it again the very next day. And so this tape became like something I really, really was into. And I started, you know, taking notes. And then he did his series on Jude. He did his series on Genesis. And I listened to the Genesis 6 tape, which was close to the same information on Return of the Nephilim. Jude, the same thing. And so as I started to hear more and more and more of this, it really started to catch. And then the internet, I guess, was really starting to catch on then. And we had internet at the house. And I got on the internet, and I found Guy Malone's site, alienresistance.org. And I started to read, you know, a lot of the stuff and a lot of the links he had on his site. And I remember starting up a Nephilim site called Project Zertan. And I started this site in '99, probably right after he started his. And he had me as a link on there. Project Zertan was a link on there until recently when GeoCities shut down their free websites. And so that's when I started MinisterFortson.com. And really continue my research. I kind of got dormant on the Project Zertan site for a long time. And, you know, this whole time I was just doing research, but that's really basically how I came to be introduced to the subject of fallen angels and the Nephilim was through my personal involvement with, you know, aliens and UFOs and that sort of research.
Okay, so as a young kid in school, you were drawn in like a lot of the youth today. You know, some of the best, some of the most popular movies out there right now deal with the subject of vampires. You know, guys like Twilight. I think they're into what, number 3 now?
Yeah.
And you know, of course, what was that series? That was it called Underworld? Underworld 1 and 2.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And you know, we've got all these new vampire series coming up on TV, and I'm thinking, wow, what is the fascination with this? And you know, it's almost developed into a whole underground youth cult, sort of like the goth music I remember once was, and everybody was dressing in black. In fact, I'll never forget it. I had some friends that I had met through a brother. It was actually, I digress. My brother and I were working together one day, and he says, I've got this investor I want you to meet. We're going to go out, and he's going to do a deal. He's going to invest in this business project we're doing. So we met him up at a Chili's restaurant, walked into this bar, and of course, we met in there, and the guy we met was sitting there, and I'll never forget him. He had long hair, had a ponytail, he had a little goatee, and he had these red-tinted John Lennon glasses on. And I kind of looked him over. He was dressed in military fatigues, had these huge black combat boots that came up to his knees, and ear piercings, tribal art all over his arms, and we sit down, and I notice he's carrying a Zero Halberton briefcase, and I said, oh, that's kind of odd. That's, you know, one of the most elite briefcases out there, you know, the aluminum style, kind of like space age. And we sat there, and then as he started to talk, the most articulate guy I had ever talked to, I said, something doesn't add up here. And we just got to talking. You know, I had misjudged the guy. I said, you know, I think he's part of that goth group out there that I'm running into. And you know, people dress all in black. The girls will have white face paint at this time, and just the most articulate guy. Well, we hit off a friendship. And make a long story short, his name was Peter. Peter and I became friends. I would go over to his house, and he had these roommates, and they were all into the Gothic music. And they kind of had an interest in vampirism. You know, these guys, they had all the windows tinted. They lived in black, you know, painted rooms. They had this really heavy, hardcore Gothic music back then. And the reason I'm thinking about this is I stayed over one night for dinner. They invited me over, and a bunch of these guys were all talking, and they were all very intelligent. Most of them were hackers. They loved vampirism, Gothic music. And I noticed it started getting dark outside, and all of a sudden they looked at me strange, and I said, oh, not a good feeling I'm feeling here. I thought for a moment I was there for dinner. I mean, you know, it was like one of these movies, you know. It was like one of those settings where you said, uh-oh, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, thank God they weren't vampires. The real ones. But folks, there are people that are out there and they're hardcore. They're actually drinking blood. They don't come out during the day. They're photosensitive to the light. And, you know, what's going on there, Dante? Why the fixation out there with the occult and especially vampirism? Are people looking for maybe acceptance, and that's where they find it? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what it is I've actually had this conversation with several people, and it seems that there's been well, we're slowly being conditioned to accept the supernatural as part of our reality. If we look at all the movies that have been coming out for, you know, a while, I mean, you had the Lost Boys, you know, and then after that you have other movies. You know, it's always a vampire movie out. I mean, I can't remember a time when there wasn't. I mean, we had Blade, we have Nosferatu, we had Interview with a Vampire, Vampire in Brooklyn with Eddie Murphy. Then you had the one with Leslie Nielsen. I can't remember what that, Dracula Dead and Loving It. So it's always some kind of vampire movie constantly out. And now I guess it's taken a turn towards the extraterrestrial thing. But it seems like the supernatural has always been there, but it seems like it's becoming more prevalent in our society as people are becoming more open to the idea of interacting with the supernatural. You mentioned earlier they have these different shows and things like that. And several people and myself believe that what is happening is these entities are getting humanity on a large scale to open these doorways or like these spiritual doorways through invitation. And these invitations can be subconscious and not just, you know, saying, well, I want you to come in. And you find that in a lot of the vampire mythology and folklore, you find that the vampires need an invitation. And that's one thing that you find with all these supernatural entities. They have that in common, is the need for some kind of invitation to get in. And so I think that may be what's going on, is that we're subconsciously being made to give them an invitation which will allow them to freely come and go in our society.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about vampirism. Then you've got this issue of the Greys and these UFOs, and people are talking about being taken. And, you know, they can recall being taken up to a mothership and probes are being stuck in their bodies and, you know, lost time. That seems to be everywhere as where. And, you know, that's been going on at least for 2 decades, you know, this interest in the UFOs and these documentaries and, you know, following these people that are having these visitations. Once again, those UFOs, they come in and they look for invitations, and people go out in there and try to find them. They go into the desert and they look for them in the sky. They start to channel them, and oftentimes they actually make contact, do they not?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, that is one proven way you can make contact is through offering an invitation. And that's not really talked about in the secular community. I don't know if they're oblivious to it or they ignore it or they haven't put it together or what, but this idea of an invitation is very prevalent. A lot of people, again, who channel these things, they have made contact. But these abductions, I guess you could say, they've been going on for a very long time. And since the 1940s, that's when it really started to be widely reported. I guess because of the advent of TV and radio and all those sorts of things are becoming, you know, common. So, and as technology becomes, you know, easier and faster, we have more of these things. You know, we have, I think, over 20 million people have claimed to have sighted a UFO or seen a UFO. And so I think it's not that it's just picked up. It's just that the technology to report these events has become more accessible to people. And so I think what's really going on is that now that there's an interest in these UFOs, and it goes back to opening these doorways. People are, you know, looking for them, channeling them or whatever. And so now we're starting to have a lot more sightings and bigger sightings. The more people that gain an interest, it seems, the bigger the sighting. The Phoenix Light was, you know, one example of a huge sighting where there were, you know, many people involved in that. There were sightings over Mexico City. So we see that these things are getting more and more I guess you say, visible to the world as a whole. The more we get into them in our culture. One of the biggest shows that was on this year was V, and I was really, really addicted to V while it was on.
Oh yeah.
And it's a remake of an older show, but the new one has taken on some different twists and turns, and now it's starting to revolve around the creation of a hybrid, and that's something that many people who are were taking on board these ships, they're reporting seeing these hybrids, and as we really get deeper into this, we'll find that there's a sexual element to almost all supernatural encounters. The vampires were considered to be sexually irresistible, and now you have this thing with these UFOs and these aliens, where it seems that their goal is that of a sexual nature, and to start producing hybrids. But I think all this is a result of the widespread invitation that we as a whole, as humanity as a whole, has been giving to these entities by showing an interest in communicating with them, and not really, I guess you say, heeding the warnings that are in the Bible.
Absolutely, and let's go to the Bible. Contact with them is actually not a recent thing. It's been going back maybe even 6,000 years ago. Let's wind it back to Genesis 6. Where did all this begin, Dante?
Well, it's very interesting. It all begins in really Genesis chapter 5. If we look at the history of it, Genesis 6 really gives a summary. But according to some of the different Jewish legends, in the Book of Enoch, definitely in the Book of Enoch, it talks about I'm sorry, not Jared. Noah's father Lamech. Him thinking that Noah might be the son of one of these angels. And other Jewish tradition teaches that these angels came down in the days of Jared. And Jared and the Jordan River have the root word yar, which means to fall or to come down. And history also holds in the Book of Enoch that they came down around Mount Hermon. Well, if you look at a map and look at where Mount Hermon is located, look at where the Jordan River begins or ends, depending on which way you're looking at it, you find that Mount Hermon and the Jordan River are very close. And so if tradition holds that, they came down in the days of Jared, and we take Jared's birth to Noah's birth, there's about 1,100 and some odd years there that these beings had to start, corrupting the earth. Because by the time Noah gets there, earth is already, to the point where God wants to destroy it. So this was happening before Noah's day. And it culminates in Noah's day. And that is the main reason for God wiping out the earth. And many people only, look at the Nephilim. But toward the end of the chapter, it talks about all flesh had become corrupt. And the Bible doesn't go into detail, but when you get to the Book of Enoch, chapter 15, I believe, it talks about how these angels were abducting women, men, animals, and all sorts of all flesh, really. And Paul in 1 Corinthians, he makes a statement, I believe it's 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where he defines the type of flesh: fish, birds, beasts, men, and celestial flesh. And so we have in the story of the Genesis 6 story, we have all 5 forms of flesh present. We have the angels, which would be celestial. We have mankind, which would be terrestrial. We have the beasts, the birds, and the fish. So everything is present, and the Bible says that all flesh had become corrupted. And so that's kind of looked over sometimes, but as we get into the stories of the Greeks and, the Sumerians and all these other cultures from around the world, they have these strange stories about hybrid creatures that were roaming the earth that were part animal, part man, and like the Minotaur, the centaurs, the satyrs, those types of things. And we find these weird stories during that time period. So whatever was going on, and then it's just like what seems to be going on now. And I don't know if you want to get into the whole hybrid, animal-human hybrid thing going on now, but all of this stuff that's going on now seems to have its origin in the days of Noah in Genesis 6.
Absolutely. The way I read it was that, God looked down and basically everything had been corrupted except for Noah and his family. It says Noah was perfect in his generations. And, if you read that at the face value, folks, you'll say, well, he was a good man. these other people were just wicked, and so, you know, God decided to wipe them out. If you really understand what the word perfect is referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, Dante, he had not been corrupted within his gene pool. In other words, what had actually happened at that point in time is these fallen angels had looked down, it says, they looked down at the daughters of men and took of them wives, whomever they chose, and basically they went down and did what God had not intended for them to do, and they come down and mate. And so what was actually going on, as I understand it, was some genetic mutation. And Satan was trying to wipe out the human race and corrupt the bloodline. And so you have all this interbreeding going on that created the men of renown, the giants. And I think you took it another step forward, Dante. Not only were these angels mating with mankind, but they were out there mating with animals, producing what some call the chimera. Would that be the correct term? Half animal, half angel?
Well, I mean, we have a lot of terms. Really, you know, we have chimera, parahuman, transhuman. There's all kinds of different terms for these throughout the different cultures too. In the Middle Ages, they called them cambions, which was half demon, half man. So you know, we get all kinds of different terminologies. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. That's one thing they were doing, was creating chimeras.
I mean, they were doing some DNA manipulation. They were mixing angel with human, and you've got these half angel, half human beast. And if that wasn't enough for them, they started mating with animals. You've got these half bull, half man. You know, the centaurs. I mean, the satyrs, the pan. You know, a goat lower body with a man on the top, and you're right, it's uncanny. I mean, you see these stories in Roman and Greek mythology. But if you understand it from a biblical perspective, they're more than stories. These things were probably running around on the planet.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I definitely believe there's something more to those stories, because it wasn't until modern times that we started referring to these stories as myths. And these weren't stories that were written down for the you know, religious practices or worship like that. And these weren't, you know, fairy tales to them. These stories were part of their history. And it's important to understand that when we read what's called mythology, it's assumed that it's, you know, mythology and not something that happened in the past. And it's only assumed to be mythology because, you know, the stories are so fantastical that it's almost unrealistic. But if you start to look around every single culture, it doesn't make sense that we're taught that, you know, these people were primitive and they didn't understand, so they made up these stories to understand the world. That doesn't seem to make sense, because they talk about things that are very complex. They talk about the mixing of DNA. They talk about hybrids. They talk about all kind of, you know, complex things. They think things about the mathematics and the solar system and stuff that we're just now finding out today. So it doesn't make sense that they were just making these stories up. And even if they were, why would every culture on the planet around the same exact time make up the same exact kinds of stories to explain the same exact things? It just doesn't make sense if these cultures weren't interacting with each other.
Absolutely. So these angels were interested in more than just sexual relations with mankind. They also came down and taught some forbidden science, did they not?
Oh yeah, definitely. The Book of Enoch details that, and that's one of the interesting things that I do cover in my book. Is I talk about the technology, and if we read the in Sumer, they have almost the same Tower of Babel story, and it revolves around technology given to man by these godlike beings called the Anunnaki. If we read Greek mythology, it was Prometheus who came down and gave man technology. If we read the Book of Enoch, these angels came down and taught man sorcery and all kinds of different technologies. If we go to the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Incas, different deities came down and gave mankind different technologies. So you find that this is prevalent all over the world. And again, it goes back to what we're taught, usually being raised, that, you know, they were just trying to explain things. But you have to ask yourself, what need would mankind have to attribute its own accomplishments to a higher, to higher powers, I guess you would say? Why would, if we developed a computer for instance, why would we need to say that a godlike being came down and brought us computer technology? And it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that what they're saying is mankind had no concept of this stuff, and these beings came down and brought it to them. So this is very prevalent all throughout history, that beings come down and give mankind different technologies, and it usually leads to their destruction somehow.
Absolutely, and so clearly there's the account of God destroying the earth with water. But what's interesting is you see the appearance of these giants again, because even after the flood, you've got David and Goliath. You've got David going out there after the I guess it was the 5 brothers of Gath. Let me ask you a question. A lot of people take the view that history just kind of is increasing in knowledge as the years go by. You start out at almost knowing nothing, and then every year since the beginning of creation, we've gotten smarter and smarter. There's some others, though, that take the view that was kind of like a roller coaster. That it's possible that thousands of years ago they had technology that we haven't even attained today. And you go up so far in history, and then something brings a crash, and you start over, go up the hill again, and then you go down and crash. How is it that there are things that cannot be explained that are found? I heard there's a book called Forbidden Archaeology by Cremo, and he has this glossary of all these objects that they have found that we can't explain how they had the technology to create them. They'll go into a coal mine and they'll break open some coal and they'll find a goblet, or they find these ancient batteries. We've got these hieroglyphics that look like an AH-64 Apache helicopter.
Yeah.
What's your view? Are we the smartest generation that's ever walked the globe, or do you think that they had some technology back then that we can't even match today? What's your opinion?
Honestly, I think we may be, I don't want to say dumb, but I believe we may be far behind what, previous cultures may have been. If we look at the Bible, if we just take the story of the Tower of Babel, it states that mankind had become of a single language, and it's not just that they had a high level of technology. God himself in the Bible says, behold, they can do anything. He said, well, nothing they will imagine can be withheld from them. So if you think about the level of technology they had developed in, it said nothing that they imagine will be withheld. This wasn't just a offhanded statement. He destroyed their civilization because what they started to try to accomplish with their knowledge. And the interesting part is this came as a result of a single language. And now we're to that point again. We're to the single language again. And, many people think it will be a spoken language. But the language of technology is known everywhere. Ones and zeros, computer programming. They have software now that if I don't speak Chinese, I can, talk in English and it will translate into Chinese. Or if somebody talks to me in Chinese, it will translate into English. So ones and zeros seems to be our new language worldwide. This is, you don't have to share any kind of cultural background or go to any kind of classes on pronunciation in order to, learn how to computer program. You just basically learn the computer programming language, and it will allow you to communicate with anybody you want to. So that's one of the things that is present in the Bible that shows that at one point there was a higher level of technology. We have all kinds of examples. The stories of Atlantis, I believe Plato wrote about Atlantis. And these stories talk about, death rays and super weapons and flying machines and all kinds of stuff. If you look at Da Vinci's drawings, Da Vinci, he thought of the helicopter and, machine guns and all kinds of stuff like that. If we watch shows like Ancient Discoveries, and it shows vending machines that were made, way back, where the weight of the coin would release a lever which would, cause something to come out or water to pour or whatever it was. And these were primitive vending machines. And all these stories, the Mahabharata, for instance, out of India, it has a story about a iron arrow that seems to be representative of a nuclear weapon. When they set it off, 2 of the 3 civilizations were wiped off the map, and the soldiers had to jump in the water. The birds turned white. The pottery started to crack for no reason. People were getting sick. Like, all kinds of stuff was going on. But you find these stories all throughout history, and it seems to really match the technology that we're just now starting to possess.
No doubt about it. I heard one of those stories where apparently there's a area of desert over in the India region, and they went over and they've taken readings, and it's radioactive. And, you know, you're looking at areas that look like just a sheet of glass. Something detonated over there, folks. And I'm in agreement with Dante. I believe that we had some technology back then that we would be amazed if we understood the real depth of what they were doing back then. And then, of course, I hear about some of these discoveries that they continue to make under the water. I mean, I heard a few years ago that there was some big city surveyed and right off the coast of Cuba, and they were trying to get the funding to go down there and map it. But from some of the images that they took, it looked like whole, main streets, and they could see some pyramidal objects on the bottom. Personally, I think that some of those civilizations are more advanced than we have today, and they just went under the waves when God judged the earth. What were they trying to do when they were building the Tower of Babel? Is there more to the story there?
There seems to be a lot more to the story. And what's interesting, what you said about the sunken cities, I do touch on those briefly in my book. But one thing I found during the course of my research is that there are estimated to be about 200 sunken cities right now that they know about. And they could possibly find more. But when I looked at that, the same thing I said, I was like, wow, 200 cities under the ocean. And so that makes you wonder if there's more to the flood story, because, of course, the secular media and, those people, they teach that, Noah's flood couldn't possibly have happened. And to me, it's hard to explain how 200 cities got underwater, and that's just the 200 we know about, and there may be more.
Well, we overlooked the other part of that, too. Doesn't it say in the Word, in the days of Peleg, when the continent separated?
The earth was divided. Exactly. Yes. So I mean, we find all kinds of things in the Scripture. But as far as what was going on at Babel was a very interesting place, because what many people believe was really going on there, some people believe they were trying to create some type of observatory, and other people believe, based on Sumerian myth, is that they had a stargate at the top of this structure, this ziggurat. And what the stargate did was allow beings to come through. If anybody's seen the show Stargate SG-1, that entire concept is based on this the Sumerian, the Mayans, different other cultures around the world that talked about these beings had some kind of portal here on Earth that they could come through.
Wow.
And so when they wanted to, make a name for themselves, unless they be scattered abroad, what some speculate is that they weren't trying to bring these beings through, but they were trying to cross over themselves. And it becomes very interesting when we talk about this, because as far as I know, I'm probably the first person to stumble upon this section of the Bible and really, really take a look at it from, this weird perspective of people trying to cross over. And one of the things that God said in the story of Babel is he said that they could do anything that they could imagine. So whatever they were trying to do, it seems that they were going to accomplish this. And it seems like what they were trying to do was get back into heaven or cross over to the spiritual realm while still in the flesh, and just use this device. And so in the Bible, we have this weird story about the marriage supper. And myself and Brother BJ had this, conversation, because he's of the belief that the marriage supper takes place in the New Jerusalem, and I was of the belief that it took place in heaven. And I said, let's sit back and look at this story for a minute, and not really argue about, where it takes place, whether it's, New Jerusalem on earth or whether it takes place in heaven. How did this man get in? There's a man that shows up, and the king or God asks him, well, how did you get in here without the proper attire or without a wedding garment? And those of us that believe the wedding garment is our newly changed body, our spiritual body that we get, by being believers in Christ when he comes back, this should stand out as odd. This guy is there, but he doesn't have a spiritual body. And this is not the judgment. He's at the wedding supper. And God didn't bring him there because God wouldn't have said, how did you get here? I mean, he didn't accidentally snatch this guy up. So the question is, how did he get into the marriage supper without a spiritual body? And so I think this may have something to do with us reaching a level of technology that not only allows spirits to cross over into our realm, but might allow us to cross over into their realm. And if we read that story carefully, after the king talks to him, this guy is speechless. And it seems that he may have come through expecting something completely different and stumbled upon this scene where God and the believers that have been snatched from earth and changed into spiritual bodies are at the wedding feast of the Lamb, and he's speechless because he has no idea, one, what to say, and two, he stumbled upon something he did not expect. And that's what it seems is going on in the story. Now, I may be 100% wrong, but based on the context of the story, he's not at the judgment, and wherever he is, he's not supposed to be there, which only leaves two choices. Either the wedding feast is taking place in heaven, and again, in which case, how did he get there? And if it's taking place in the New Jerusalem, how did he get in? I mean, if we read the measurements for the New Jerusalem, I believe the gates are about 120 miles high or something like that. So he certainly didn't climb in and sneak past the angels and, all kinds of other scenarios. So it raises the question, how exactly did he get into the marriage supper without a spiritual body? And I think it may have something to do with what we refer to as a stargate, which allows spirits to pass over to us. I believe it may also allow us to pass over into their realm.
Wow. Now, that is an interesting supposition there. That's very possible. I've often wondered, you hear about these reports that they've cited pyramidal structures on Mars, even the moon. And then let's just go back to what we know for a fact, and that is we've got these huge pyramids over in Giza. And they say that they're constructed with such a high level of expertise that we can't even duplicate them today. You couldn't even put a piece of paper between some of these blocks. They were so professionally milled, not to mention just the weight of these. And I want to come back to this in a moment. There's clearly some things here that we can't explain. So going back here to Genesis 6, you've got these sons of God. They come down here and they take apparently mates of any that they believe is fair. And they're basically interbreeding. Where do you think these sons of God come from? Are they the fallen angels that rebelled with Lucifer? What's your take on that?
I think it's interesting. We have a tendency to kind of lump everything together. Either the fallen or the good. Either the fallen or the good. According to the Book of Enoch, there were only 200 of these angels. They were called the Watchers or the Grigori. There were only 200 of them that actually, started to participate in the Genesis 6 events, and that's according to the Book of Enoch. And what's interesting is the Bible talks about an innumerable amount of angels, and 1/3 of them went with Lucifer. So if only a small portion of these angels, did this thing the first time, if you take 200 people and you start to multiply over a 1,100-year period, then, the numbers get pretty big really fast. So I think that either there's two choices here. Either they were a part of the original group of Lucifers that fell, or they may have been a different group. According to the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, God sent a special group of angels to help mankind after the fall. And some believe that these were a group that started out good, and then later, because of their lust for women or their attraction towards women, they started to cohabit with women. And so it may have been that they were part of an entirely separate group that did this. And what's interesting about this entire story is the Book of Enoch gives the number of 200. If we go to Sumer estimates that there were 300. So there isn't really a big difference in the numbers. Sumer says that there were 300 Anunnaki that were living on Earth, and they feared the flood, which to me is very interesting that these were seen as gods in Sumer, but yet they were afraid of this deluge that was coming. So yeah, they could have been a part of Lucifer's original group that fell, or they could have been another group altogether. But many of the sources say, you know, it wasn't a large amount. It was a fairly small amount, between 200 and 300 angels that came down and had sex with women and created the hybrids.
You know, what's always been interesting to me, Dante, is, you know, Jesus is ministering, and I think it was the Sadducees or the Pharisees one that came up and asked him about marriage. And Jesus says, you know, I believe he's talking about in heaven, we will not marry or give a marriage just as the angels don't. So I'm thinking, if it's not the policy of God to have marriage in heaven with these angels, how is it that they had the faculties to actually come down and procreate? Apparently they do, and they come down and they produce these gigantic offspring, which seem to have also just, there seem to be some of them just carnivorous even. I mean, if you read Enoch, do they not go out and they just start eating everything in sight? And even kind of, the word I was looking for is voracious appetites. They're eating food, they eat animals. Do they even start eating men and become cannibalistic?
Oh yeah, definitely. And one thing I'm glad that you touched on before we get to the cannibalism thing, that really dates back. That goes along with the whole vampirism thing, the drinking of blood and eating of human flesh and all that. It really starts back in the Genesis 6 days, and not with Vlad Dracul or Vlad the Impaler as we're taught in school. But yeah, one thing you touched on was Jesus' words are very specific in the Bible if we read them. He states that the angels of God in heaven do not marry nor are given in marriage. And one thing that we have to remember is that these angels that did this were not angels of God, and they were not in heaven. And so those two things right there did not apply to these angels. And also it says that they don't marry, but it never makes a reference to their capability of having sex. It never says that they can't have sex. Marriage is not necessary to perform the physical act of sex. And we see that all the time. You don't have to be married to have sex with someone. So these fallen angels, the rules would not seem to apply to them. And one thing you talked about is you wonder how they had the ability to do this. If we turn to Jude chapter 1, it's only one chapter, but verse 6, it talks about the angels who kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. The word there in Greek is oikoterion, which is only used twice in the Bible. Once is used in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, I believe, where Paul is talking about us longing to put on our clothing or our tent, our tabernacle from heaven so that we're not found naked. He's specifically talking about our spiritual body. In the same context, Jude is talking about the spiritual bodies that the angels took off. And so it gets really interesting. Whatever these angels did, they found out a way to change what they were and become something very, very close to human in order to procreate. But yes, they created these giants who had a taste for human flesh. And we find that in almost every culture that these giants were cannibalistic. We read the diary of Buffalo Bill Cody. It talks about these giants that defied the Creator, and so the Creator sent a flood to wipe them out. I believe it's the Pawnee Indians that believe that. I have to check to make sure. But the Native Americans do have a legend that there were giants, and the flood did come to wipe out these giants. In the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, it's right. One thing that catches the attention. I'll grind his bones to make my bread. You have the cannibalistic element to that story. So it does seem to be something to the legends of cannibalism. If we read in Numbers 13:33, when the 10 spies came back, they said the land devours its inhabitants. And it's making a reference to it eating the inhabitants, to cannibalism. He said, these Nephilim were there. So we do find that this is very prevalent in stories among these giants, that they did eat flesh and drink blood.
Absolutely. That's my take on it. And I've talked to a friend, Steve Quill, who also has an interest in giants in the Genesis account. And he brings out that what they believe started to happen is these giant offspring, they would develop double sets of teeth. They would could be signified by 6 fingers, 6 toes, and they would be growing up to sometimes 30 feet or more. I mean, I couldn't even imagine coming up against one of those, but I think one even used a term, they developed a name for them. They called them the long walkers. I thought that was kind of interesting. But let me fast forward here. So you've got the mating going on with the human species. God sees that this genetic inbreeding is taking place, and it's corrupting mankind, and you get down to just got Noah and his family, 8, that had not been corrupted, and God makes a decision, I better intervene or there's not going to be anybody that's not has not been polluted. And he wipes these beasts off the face of the earth, puts them under the waves with the flood. Yet we see the reemergence of giants again after the flood. What do you think took place there? Did some of them manage to survive the flood? Some say they jumped on the ark as a stowaway, or did the angels come back again and repeat what they had done the first time?
That's really interesting. You know, there's all kinds of stories. There's a story of Og stowing away on the ark and that sort of thing. But what's interesting is if we read in Genesis chapter 7, it says that the waters went 15 cubits over the mountaintops. That's 22.5 feet, I believe. So God makes it a point to make it so that these giants couldn't have gone to the very mountaintops and survive, because they would have had to sleep. They would have had to come down eventually, and they would have drowned. I don't think anything survived. I do believe that there was a second outbreak near Sodom and Gomorrah. If we read in Genesis chapter 14, when the war between the kings breaks out, when Lot gets kidnapped and Abraham has to go get him, we find that the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zuzim, those tribes which are associated with the Nephilim, we see that they're getting slaughtered, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities come to their rescue. So we already see them right there. What's even more interesting is, one, the Bible doesn't, make a direct reference to it after the flood, but it does make the reference in Genesis 6. It says the giants or the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men. And it basically tells how it happened. So after the flood, the sons of God came back into the daughters of men, and they took more wives. What's very interesting, though, is if we look at the, I believe it's called Tep Zepi, the Egyptian creation story. As we read through this, we find that their belief is that a strange group of gods descended shortly after the flood. And these gods started to mate with mankind and create these hybrids once again. So we also find, this story in the Egyptian culture. It's not just in the Bible. And so these angelic beings were altogether different group. Now, I don't know if the first group of angels perished in the flood because, they had taken off their bodies, as Jude said. I don't know if they perished in the flood or if they were rounded up and then tossed into Tartarus. But however they end up in Tartarus, they end up in Tartarus. So this seems to be a totally different group of angels that came just after the flood and started this back up again. And as we'll see after the flood, when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, it's very interesting because there's 5 cities that were supposed to be destroyed, but Lot begged for, I believe it was Zoar, to not be destroyed. And so God does leave one of these cities, but you find that instead of destroying everything, God takes small steps to keep the Nephilim problem in check. The Israelites are constantly at war with the Philistines, and the Philistines have tribes with the Nephilim in them. When they go into the Promised Land, they are commanded to wipe out every man, woman, and child in certain tribes. So it seems that the Sodom and Gomorrah incident may be related to the second emergence of the Nephilim, and the Nephilim, may have continued on after that until the whole Promised Land issue. But I do believe that there were at least 2 incursions, if not more, of these angels coming down and producing these hybrid offspring.
No doubt about it. I'm in total agreement with you. And if you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Omega Man Radio Network. I've got special guest tonight, Minister Dante Fortson. He's author of a new book that's coming out called The Sons of God and the Coming Apocalypse. And Dante, go ahead and give out your website again, also for those just tuning in.
The website is ministerfortson, FORTSON.com.
Praise God. So Dante, we have this interbreeding going on, and the Bible talks about God takes these fallen angels that were involved in this plot and basically chains them in outer darkness, I guess, awaiting judgment. But you've got some of them that appear to be locked up. Apparently others go ahead and they repeat the same process after the flood. And, you know, you hear about the children of Israel having to fight these things as they're going into the Promised Land. You've got King Og, I think, who had a bed that was about 15 foot long.
14 and a half, yes.
Wow. I couldn't even imagine that. And you've got David and Goliath, and, you know, he apparently had 5 brothers, or 4 brothers. You know, I heard it interesting that you know, the Bible says he picked up, was it 5 stones?
5 stones. Yep, 5 stones exactly.
Did he fight more than Goliath that day, do you think? Was he intending to go after Goliath's brothers? What do you think?
I think he was fully expecting Goliath's brothers to come after him after he killed Goliath, and I believe that he had so much faith that he believed he only needed 1 stone for each of them, and I think that's exactly why he only picked up 5.
Wow, that's amazing. And then, of course, you come into modern times, and you've got you know, these legends of giants in Europe. You know, apparently the founders of Romulus and Remus, I guess 2 giant brothers, supposed to be founders of Rome, right?
Yep.
And, you know, various accounts of these guys on up to modern times. I'm going to jump ahead just for a minute, and then we'll circle back again. It leads to the question, if this has already happened multiple times in history, is it happening even now? And is it your thought that maybe we have some giants walking the earth as we speak tonight?
One thing that's been considered, and I for a while thought I was alone in this, but I guess recently people have been, there are other people who believe this too, that this last incursion of Nephilim will not be the giant hybrids of old. And I actually came to this conclusion through a lot of the research I did for the book I was writing. And one thing that I noticed is that starting from Genesis 6, we have the incursions, but all throughout history, there have been many supernatural creatures, but if you look at the motives, they all seem to be the same. They kidnap women for the sake of producing hybrids or having sex. If we look at the satyrs in Greek mythology, they were known for kidnapping women and having sex with them. The gods of the different mythologies would come down and have sex with women. I believe it's called the ecstasy of Saint Agnes. She was a nun that claimed that an angel came into her one night and had sex with her. Like, you know, all kinds of weird stories all throughout history. And during the Middle Ages, they have 2 outbreaks, actually. They have an outbreak of incubus and succubus stories where the male and female demons come in the middle of the night to you know, have sex with the people, and they would produce an offspring called a cambion, which was half demon, half human. Well, the other outbreak that was very strange going on at this time was the fairies. There was a widespread belief in fairies, and fairies aren't, as we think of them, you know, the butterfly-like friendly creatures. They were actually considered to be mischievous creatures in Ireland and places like that. Yeah. Well, what's not widely known is they had what were called changelings. And if you've seen the movie with Angelina Jolie, they were basically, she lost her son, and they claimed they found her son. They were trying to give her son back, but she kept saying, "This is not my son." And the cops were trying to tell her, "Yes, it really is your son." And she, you know, she wouldn't accept that, and it wasn't her son. Well, the changeling mythology surrounding the fairies is very much the same. They would try to slip in these beings that looked very close to human, but most humans could tell that they weren't human. And so it seems that if these entities are the same, and I believe that, you know, the angels were just changing their form to really mask their entire plot, it seems that whatever they were doing, they were trying to get rid of those genetic defects, the 6 fingers, the double rows of teeth, the enormous height and strength. Maybe not the strength, but the enormous height. The things that would make the Nephilim stand out that you know, made people kill them all throughout history. It seems that they were trying to breed this out and get it to a point where they could pass off one as a human. And many people believe this, you know, is going on now. I had a chance to speak with Doug Riggs, And he had some women who were, claiming to have given birth to modern-day Nephilim, and they claimed that these Nephilim could walk among us. Now, I didn't come into his information until after I'd already done my research and came to my own conclusion that the same thing was going on. And so when I found, his information on the subject, it kind of blew my mind that, he had also reached the same conclusion, but from a different, coming up at it a different way. So I do believe that there may be Nephilim walking among us, based on, the reports that come out of the alien abductions now, that people see these hybrids that look very close to humans. So I don't know how long they would have been walking among us, but I do believe that, there are hybrids walking among us, but I do not believe that they will be giants as they were last time. I think they will blend right in, and we won't be able to tell.
Wow. Now, we've got these incredibly large creatures, the giants. I've also heard that they have discovered these miniature versions. I guess you would call them hobbits or dwarfs. And there was even a whole island that was recently explored, and they found graves of these little creatures. Did you ever do any research on that?
I watched it briefly on one of the either History or Discovery. I watched it very briefly, but I did find it interesting, though, that they were finding these creatures. And all throughout history, we have stories of leprechauns and brownies and, all kinds of things like that. But I do find that very interesting, but I haven't had the time to really get deep into it as I would like to.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you, we're going to get down to some hardcore questions here. Let's go back to Genesis 6. We've got these angels, the sons of God, that come down. They are mating with mankind. They create these gigantic offspring that die in the flood. Now, you've got half angel, half human. Would these creatures, when they die, would they go to heaven or hell? Or, as some have mentioned, these may actually be what we now know as the demons. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. See, I'm of that camp that believe they did become the demons. And it seems to make sense because, as you mentioned, they're hybrids. They're not angel nor human fully. And if we do a study of demons and we do a study of angels and put them side by side and compare, the capabilities that are talked about, we have two completely different entities. And Moses makes a weird statement about, the Israelites worshiping gods that came newly up that their fathers did not fear. And if you think about that, it's a very weird statement. Why would he mention these new supernatural beings coming up that their fathers did not fear? Where did they come from? So that's one weird statement. In the book of Enoch, Noah says the same thing. Noah says, because they were born of angel and human, there'll be evil spirits upon the earth, and they'll roam the earth. So you have this new weird creature that comes in during, right after the flood, and they start to possess mankind, and they, do all kinds of destructive things by interacting through men. And something weird that I ran across myself several years ago, and I've been trying my hardest to find this again, and I haven't been able to find it, is that when I was searching for something about aliens online back when I was really into this stuff, and I ran across these beings called the Nephilim. This was really before I really got deep into the Nephilim, and they claim to be an old civilization that was wiped out in a flood, and that they needed to possess bodies in order to communicate with mankind. And I didn't really put it together until a while later after I learned about the whole Nephilim scenario, and I was like, wait a minute, that was, what I read back then when I didn't know what they were. And ever since then I've been trying to find it. I have no luck pulling it back up, but it had to do with these people who were channeling these spirits called the Nephilim. So I do believe that the Nephilim did become what we know today as demons, and that demons and fallen angels are not the same thing at all.
I would tend to agree. What's interesting, in fact, it just kind of occurred to me tonight, as I've gotten involved in deliverance and I've started to study the subject, you hear about a lot of these demons manifesting. People can see them, and they take on animal shapes. And I will tell you the truth. We were doing a deliverance session and cast this demon out called Citri, and we got a picture of it. We looked it up on the internet, and if it was a true representation, it had wings, and it had kind of a griffin face, and it was kind of, it looked like half human, half animal. I often wonder if maybe if these in fact demons are the evil spirits of these half man, half angels that died in the flood, and they've been cursed to, roam the earth. God's not going to let them into heaven. And, they're looking for a body. When they manifest sometimes, maybe they're manifesting as what they were actually were before. And so if you've got, giants, if you've got these half animal, half humans, maybe that's what they were. You'd have a whole mixture. If these angels were mating with birds and fish and, goats and bulls and humans, you'd have all kinds of shapes and sizes, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, definitely. And
we were.
One thing I noticed throughout history is that a lot of the stories collaborate with the Bible says. That all flesh have become corrupted. If we look at fish, you have the mermaid stories, half man, half fish. If we look at the land animals, again, minotaurs, centaurs, satyrs, that sort of thing. If we look at the birds, we have the harpies of the Greek mythology, and all the other hybrid creatures that were around that time. So, if we look at each type of flesh that is mentioned by Paul, and we go back, we can find a hybrid in some culture that is associated with that type of flesh.
No doubt about it. And I'll tell you what's funny. We were doing a program last night, and a lady called in. We prayed, and we cast this demonic spirit out. Well, one of the brothers actually saw it manifest. He said it manifested as looked like a spider monkey. It was a tiny imp, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, monkey? Maybe that's one of those demons that came out of a human mating with an angel mating with a monkey. I don't know. But there are definitely some bizarre shapes. Now, let's go back to incubus and succubus. We've got people that claim they have sex with angels, with demons. Do you think that that can actually create a offspring even today, or are they just engaging in a sexual act but no offspring? What do you think is going on there?
I do believe that the offspring are still being made today, and I see no reason why there couldn't be offspring. If it happened before, Jesus stated that as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. He didn't make any exceptions in his statement. In fact, if we read the entire context of what Jesus was saying, he adds in, before the flood they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. And many people take that to be, the world will just be caught off guard because it will be going on as usual. Well, that's if you don't take it in context of what's going on in Genesis chapter 6. If we read back there, the only reference to anybody giving in marriage is the sons of God and the daughters of men. So we have that first obstacle. The second thing, Jesus makes a warning. He says, woe to them that are with child in those days. Again, if we take his statement that it will be like the days of Noah, and we go back, the reference to the offspring was very strange. They were hybrids. So, we have these passages in Genesis 6 that really go hand in hand with everything that Jesus was saying. And then Jesus makes a reference to his second coming, and he makes sure to throw in the angels. He says the angels don't know. So why all of these references to Genesis 6 and angels if nothing is really going to be going on, if it's just going to be some big charade? And I know there are people from, other camps that don't believe anything is going on, but that doesn't seem to be the context of what Jesus is saying. Jesus is giving us a real warning. If we go to Luke 21, it talks about men's hearts would fail them for fear because of those things coming on the earth, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And when Paul is telling us we war against principalities, against powers, and the rulers of darkness of this world, the spiritual wickedness in high places, powers are a rank of evil spirit. We find that in several places. But Jesus says that the powers in heaven shall be shaken. So this seems to be a very supernatural warning in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. So to me, it doesn't eliminate any possibility from the days of Noah scenario. And also, if we take what Jesus was saying in context with Daniel 2:43, where Daniel says, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, they have to be something other than the seed of men in order to be mingling with the seed of men. So we find these strange references to something weird going on in the very last days. So yes, I do think that that offspring can still be produced. I don't see any reason why it couldn't.
Well, we know for a fact that we have the technology to create clones. I mean, you know, several decades ago, they were cloning sheep. And I remember some reports coming out that there was a big debate that they needed to pass laws to prevent, you know, human cloning from taking place, yet there were some which had kind of intimated that it's probably already taken place. In fact, it's too late to stop it. I've seen pictures of these rats, and they would have a human ear grown on the back. We've got reports of cows, or excuse me, pigs, that have human body parts. You know, or they've got the same blood that could be used for, you know, transplants going on. Brother, I think it's already happened, and they're just trying to keep the lid on it.
We know it's already happened, and actually the lid has kind of been blown on it. In 2009, there was a bill introduced called the Human Animal Hybrid Prohibition Act.
Uh-oh.
And you can actually find this online. You can find the text to it. The name slipped my mind right now, but one of the senators is a guy from, I believe he's a Republican, Sam something. I can't remember his full name. But yeah, he brought this bill, and it was Louisiana was the first state to adopt it, the Human Animal Hybrid Prohibition Act. This year, Arizona adopted it, and now Ohio is trying to adopt this law. And basically what it says we have reached the point where we can create animal-human hybrids. And what they want to do with this entire bill is not blur the lines between what it means to be human and what it means to be animal. So what this law does is it makes it a felony to knowingly create an animal-human hybrid that consists of 0.01 of more than 0.01 of an animal if you're putting it inside of a human, or human if you're, you know, putting the DNA inside of an animal. So whatever you're creating has to be 99.99% one or the other. If you knowingly create something that falls outside of those lines, you could be charged with a Class 6 felony. Or if you knowingly purchase a embryo that falls outside of those lines, you can be charged with a misdemeanor. So these states are adopting real laws. England, I believe, adopted a similar law a couple of years ago. China actually started to, they successfully fused rabbit and human cells together. So, I mean, these laws are coming out now. And,
well, as we know,
this is something going on.
There's always countries that aren't part of the signatories, and so they're kind of rogue. I had heard, this was back in the early 90s, that they had taken this island called Elba, which is actually where Napoleon was exiled to, and he died. And they had set up a big research facility over there, and it was dubbed Biochip Island. And it was sort of like something you might imagine would come out of like the island of Dr. Moreau. This was 20 years ago, folks. You know, biotechnology. You know, they're working on how to, you know, biochip implants. My guess is they were probably doing some gene research over there. It makes you wonder, what would you find in some of these labs if you were able to actually get access to it? I can't remember the name of the movie, but I'm sure you all probably saw it. It was this recent one that came out a few months ago about Splice. That was it. Did you get a chance to see that?
I've seen bits and pieces. I haven't had a chance to really watch it in its entirety.
Listen, I'm almost ashamed that I went to see it, folks. I came out of that movie. I went to a late night one. It was like at midnight. And I had an inkling of what it was going to be about. Now, I don't watch horror movies, okay, but I was pretty certain what I was going to see, and my guess was right. Folks, if you wanted to have a glimpse into what it was probably like in the time of Noah, Genesis 6, you watch this movie, I'll tell you, brother, it was so sickening. I came out of that movie, and there was a guy walking ahead of me, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, I'm kind of speechless. He says, yeah, me too. He says, I wish I hadn't seen it. We both walked out of there sick to our stomachs because what they were doing doing the research that we're talking about, and these creatures, they turn around and they mated. and the result of that was just pure wickedness. Folks, I believe this is going on the planet somewhere right now. You know, we've got untold research labs that are underground. You know, Area 51 is a famous one. A lot of people believe that that kind of research is done there. Really, we don't know, because there hasn't been many people that have gotten out of there and been able to speak and live long about it. Of course, I believe that they do some top secret military testing out there, but what's your thinking on that, Dante? Do you think that they could possibly be doing some genetic research out there as well?
I definitely believe it, and it's interesting. Again, in my book, I worked on some genetic. While I was researching some genetic, background in genetic manipulation. There we go. I couldn't get the words out. And as I was researching this, one of the very interesting tidbits of information I came across was when the first animal was cloned. It was actually a African frog in the 1950s, and it blew my mind that they already started cloning way back then. And so what really hit me from there was, wait a minute, we didn't hear about Dolly the sheep until 1996. If they had already successfully cloned a frog in 1957, why are we just now hearing about clones in the 90s? And so that, to me, meant the research had been going on long before then. But one thing, again, as I mentioned earlier, one thing we have to pay attention to is what history says about sudden bursts of technology. There's always some kind of beings that come down and give mankind technology. And one thing I started to plot out was the instances of UFO crashes, and compared to the sudden, changes in our technology. And one thing we'll find is that within a couple of years of almost every reported UFO crash, we have some major leap in technology or some new technology that develops. And that may be coincidence, and it may not be anything to it, or it may be spot on. But as I started to research a lot of this stuff, I noticed that our interest in science, we went from being interested in flight and reaching the moon and stretching out to planets. If you notice, our space program has become kind of lax, I guess you would say. We went to the moon, and then that was it. We sent a couple of robot cars to Mars, and every now and then they'll mention something about Mars. But what I find to be very interesting is our sudden interest in manipulating DNA and manipulating life and creating hybrids and really messing with what it means to be human. Why the sudden interest? And a bit of research I came upon is as we talked about before, the chimera research. But they're looking to sharks and different things like that for cancer cures and other different kind of cures for medical problems that humans face. What I find to be the most interesting is when you talk about these chimeras, what they were talking about doing was breeding these chimeras, letting them live for 14 days in order to research them, and then killing them. Now, the Catholic Church is stepping in saying, no, if you let them live for 14 days, their life, and by law you can't kill them because it's murder, because they're still human. Because they're part human, they should have human rights. And so now the Catholic Church is arguing to keep these things alive, while science is saying, no, we need to kill these things after 14 days. So what we're going to have here is we potentially have hybrids that may be allowed to live and walk among society. But not only that, what they're trying to do is to develop a way that people who were not born as hybrids can inject themselves with either hybrid information or completely animal information that would make them resistant to a lot of diseases, and essentially allowing you to become some sort of hybrid even after you were born with no hybrid traits. So that right there is kind of disturbing, that we're getting to that point in our knowledge, in our search to really understand what it means to be human. We're already trying to cross ourselves with another species and change what it means to be human.
I mean, I had seen the picture of the human ear grown on the back of a rat, and they said, this was going to be a breakthrough for people that need ear transplants. And I've heard that they had been able to extract some of the DNA from some of these moray eels, the electric eels and things like the lightning bug, and they had been able to inject this into cats and come up with a cat that would be fluorescent at night, almost glow in the dark. And I'm thinking, that's freaky. Or you hear about, they're taking animal DNA and, bug DNA, and they're putting it into crops that would luminesce, and all these different capabilities. And so then you get into the realm of genetically manipulated food, which clearly is making its way into the food supply. That's shocking in and of itself. And Monsanto's kind of at the cutting edge of that. They've got all types of Terminator seed technology, and once again, I can see this stuff just running away. And it's sickening when you think about the potential there. But I believe it's undeniable that we've probably already crossed that line, and it's being done in these labs. And God have mercy. The Bible says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. They'll be eating and drinking and given in marriage, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. You think there's also reference there of the genetic inbreeding? And we've already been warned of it?
I believe that statement is all-encompassing to the time of Noah. And one thing that also falls into the time of Noah that many people don't realize is that the Tower of Babel situation falls into the time of Noah. The time of Noah doesn't, stop at Genesis 6. It actually stops at Genesis chapter 11. Because after the flood, Noah lives an additional 350 years. And if we plot out the timeline given to us by the Bible, Abraham is born 286 years after the flood. So Noah is still alive. Noah doesn't die until Abraham is 64 years old.
Wow.
But Noah is, no longer a main part of the story. And even more, amazing than that is the lifespan of Shem. If we calculate the lifespan of Shem, Shem doesn't die until Jacob and Esau are 77 years old, 76, 77 years old, right around in there. So Shem, you have Abraham, you have Isaac, and you have Jacob. They could have all got first-hand accounts from Shem. If we read in the Bible where Jacob steals Esau's birthright, or he doesn't really steal it, he negotiates. He's an opportunist. He takes the opportunity of Esau's weakness and gets his birthright. One thing Esau says that is very interesting. He says, "The days for mourning of my father are at hand, and after that I will kill Jacob my brother." Well, if you look at what's going on, they're about 76, 77 years old. Isaac doesn't die. Isaac doesn't die for at least another 20 years. So who was he mourning? Well, if you plot this out on the timeline, that's exactly about the time that Shem dies. And in the Hebrew, they didn't call people grandfather or grandmother. They just referred to, the elders as their father. So Shem fits right into that timeline where Jacob gets Esau's birthright. So I do believe that, a lot of the things that happen in the Genesis chapters 6 through 11 are included in that days of Noah scenario, including the attempt to become like gods, as they were doing with Babel. And many people associate that with the CERN super collider. Russian scientists recently have started saying, that's a time machine. One of the guys that were actually working on the super collider claims that it is a time machine, and he was actually arrested a few months ago. He started saying that he was a time traveler, that he had come back from I believe it was the future, to stop himself from making some mistake. And he was arrested. And so there's all these scientists now trying to sue to keep this thing from being kicked up to full capacity. Excuse me. And it seems very weird that all these scientists are coming out saying, that the collider is not what it appears to be. Some are saying it's a time machine, some saying it's some kind of portal to open dimensions, but all of them are in agreement that this CERN super collider is not what they say it is. So I do believe that everything that was going on in the days of Noah applies to our time now.
No doubt about it. And back to a statement I was making earlier about the Great Pyramid of Giza. Folks, that's technology that was used there that we can't even replicate today if we tried. And those are some pretty big blocks to be moving around. I've always thought, hey, it would take more than a bunch of people trying to move a stone on, some logs and some rope. I don't think it'd even be possible to replicate it that way. my own take on it is it was probably the giants that got together and put that thing together. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's very interesting, and in my book I do touch on the pyramids briefly. But one thing that I do debunk is, and it's easily debunked, anybody can do it, is the story of how these pyramids were built. And the accepted story right now, the accepted theory, is that they were built over a 20-year period. The Great Pyramid was built over 20 years. And what you find is that some of the rocks that make up the King's Chamber, they come from about 500 miles away. The majority of the stones that make up the Great Pyramid come from across the Nile River. And so these stones had to be cut out and moved into place, and as you mentioned, placed very accurately. And in some places you can't even slide a razor blade or a sheet of paper between the stones. And so what you have is you have a structure that consists of a little over 2.3 million blocks. Well, if you actually, break down the calculations over a 20-year period, for them to lay 2.3 million blocks day and night for 20 years straight, they would have exactly 4 minutes and 10 seconds to cut, move, and place each block if they work for 20 years straight, day and night. And that doesn't seem feasible at all for them to cut it, move it across the river, move it up those ramps they claim they had, and place it. It would have to be a continuous, line from the time they start of blocks constantly coming up. And it doesn't seem to make sense. Even the ones that were 500 miles away would have had to have made it there before the completion. So I do believe that some of these giants were involved in the building of those pyramids. And one of the things I speculate on is that it goes back to Nimrod. And the reason it points to Orion, the mighty hunter. If you notice in the Bible, Nimrod was called a mighty hunter, and he wanted to make a name for himself in the stars. So the King's Chamber points directly to Orion, which becomes very interesting because in some other one or two other countries that I found, I have to actually go back and check the exact names of these countries, but it's in the book. They also associate the Great Pyramids with Nimrod, and after they scattered, it doesn't talk about Nimrod anymore after everybody scatters. And so Nimrod goes off somewhere. He doesn't just die. Different cultures believe he was eventually killed by, an animal. I believe it's the Islamic culture that says he was killed by Esau. But Nimrod doesn't just die after this Tower of Babel thing. He continues to, do whatever it is he does. And so I do believe that Nimrod may have employed some of the Nephilim and had this pyramid built. Patrick Hearn has a good book called The Nephilim and the Pyramid of the Apocalypse, where he speculates that the fallen angels may have something to do with the building of this pyramid. And he compares this pyramid, which was originally supposed to be covered in limestone, so it would reflect the sun, and it had a golden stone at the top, a golden capstone. He speculates that it's supposed to mimic the New Jerusalem in heaven. And it's very interesting the research he does, and I definitely suggest to anybody, to read that book. If you really want to get some really detailed information about the pyramids. But yes, I do believe that the giants somehow play into the construction of the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, not only in the pyramid have you got some really huge stones, but I understand they found some of these structures over in, I believe, Cambodia. That someone weighed 20 tons apiece, and like stacked up on each other. And it's like, how could a human possibly move that? I believe you had angelic involvement, whether it be the giants or the fallen angels themselves. Heron could be onto something though. They say the New Jerusalem dimensions could be either a cube or it could be a pyramid. And I think it was Heron who said that maybe it was the fallen angels. They've been kicked out of heaven, and they know what it looks like, so they were trying to build their own version of it. I've heard others say it's a power plant. Others say they that it's nothing more than just a burial chamber for a king. But I don't agree with that later assumption. I think that there's definitely some demonic involvement here. This is all fascinating.
Well, I do, before we move on, you mentioned You mentioned that some of the structures, weigh 20 tons. I don't know if you've ever heard of Baalbek, but for those who have not heard of Baalbek, the stones that make up Baalbek, some of them weigh up to 1,100 tons, and it's this huge temple.
Golly.
And if you look up the pictures of Baalbek, you'll see a man standing there, and this structure completely eclipses almost anything we can think of right now. And I mean, they're multiple columns that weigh between 750 and 1,100 tons that are carved and put up to, they're like, Baalbek is probably about 10 to 15 times bigger than the White House. So this place is huge. And they, they speculate that this was done with Roman cranes. But again, these, we didn't have a crane until 1996 that could even lift, these 1,100-ton stones, carved stones. So again, the story behind these don't make sense. But if anybody gets a chance to look up Baalbek, B-A-A-L-B-E-K, it's a massive monument, 1,100-ton columns. So that's just something to really look at.
Where is that located at?
Where's Baalbek? I believe it's somewhere near Rome, and that's why they come up with the theory that it was created with the Roman cranes.
Wow.
I'm not exactly sure. It might be Greece or somewhere around in that area, but yeah.
Man, that's a lot of weight to be trying to move around. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Mega Man Radio Network. We've got Minister Dante Fortson on tonight, and we're talking about a number of subjects: fallen angels, vampires, the Nephilim. Minister Fortson's website is ministerfortson.com, and he's author of a book that's going to be coming out August 27th called As the Days of Noah Were, The Sons of God in the Coming Apocalypse. I'm actually looking forward to that book coming out. That's going to be one I'm going to add to my collection. I would encourage people out there to do the same. Brother, let me ask you, we're talking about pyramids here. We're talking about these chimera, genetic manipulation. Where do the dinosaurs fit in all this? Any thoughts on that?
That is an interesting question. And as I was coming up, I actually realized, like at a very young age, something didn't sit right with the dinosaurs. And it seemed like the information I was getting, I don't know, to me it just never was right. I never believed that, the dinosaurs lived all these millions of years ago, as we were taught coming up. Even as a very little kid, I just remember not believing that. And I didn't think it made sense, like, the Earth got hit with an asteroid or a comet or a meteor, and it wiped out all the dinosaurs. To me, that didn't make sense either. And as I started to research the dinosaurs, one thing I realized is that the dinosaurs are just as much lizard as they are bird. And even today we call birds raptors. And I'm of the belief that we can understand the past by looking at our present. And one of the things that has been proposed to bring back these dinosaurs is using a crocodile, fertilizing a crocodile egg with dinosaur DNA, or fertilizing a turkey egg with dinosaur DNA, or chicken egg. Like, what was it about dinosaurs that made them to where you could, bring back a dinosaur using either a bird or a reptile? One thing that I found in my research is that they had brought back mammoths, but the only way that they could bring back a mammoth was to use to mix an African and an Asian elephant, and to use an actual elephant to bring back a mammoth. But it's not the same with dinosaurs. So I'm of the conclusion that dinosaurs may have been some kind of hybrid experiments containing birds, lizard, possibly angel DNA. We see from the Nephilim that they created giant offspring. And so this may have been some kind of genetic experimentation that were going on, which explains why all the dinosaurs seem to die out at the exact same time. If we look at Noah's flood, the flood wipes out everything that wasn't on board the ark. And we know that there was a mass extinction of really everything on Earth. So I believe that the dinosaurs may have been, genetic experiments that God did not include on the ark. And when people talk about, they still see dinosaurs and things like that, I believe that may still be the case. I believe that these angels continued there, whatever the activities they were doing before the flood, I believe that another set continued doing these same activities. And so they may still be creating, different kind of hybrid animals and things like that. But I do believe that the dinosaurs could possibly have been hybrids or experiments of some kind that fell into that whole corruption of all flesh.
Well, I think that's very feasible. I've also heard another theory, and that was that if you look at some of these creatures, they kind of look very similar to the ones that we have today. Like one of them looked like a huge version of a kangaroo. And one theory was after the flood, we lost the extra water canopy. We lost some of the oxygen content, and maybe things were growing to a super size back then, and all of a sudden, post-flood, you don't have the oxygen, you don't have the ultraviolet ray protection, and, things just started to get smaller. But I tend to agree with you that it sounds to me like God destroyed them because maybe the angels were getting in there and not only trying to manipulate man, but animals as well. So,
oh yes, definitely. That's definitely what I think happened. I definitely think that God wiped out a lot of things that we may not even, know about right now. Probably things that we've never even considered.
What do you think about the gap theory? Have you ever looked at that? You familiar with the gap theory?
I think the gap theory is very interesting for several reasons. It explains a lot of things. One thing that I do not fit into the gap theory is dinosaurs, because we know that according to the Bible that death came in through the actions of Adam with him eating the fruit. So the gap theory really doesn't explain too much with the dinosaurs, but I do find the gap theory to be very, very interesting based on several things. Isaiah, Jeremiah, the vision that Jeremiah saw where it was without form and void, and the cities were broken down by God's fierce anger, and there was no man. That's a very interesting part of that entire scenario. There was no man. So whatever Jeremiah is seeing seems to predate man. The cities are broken down by God's fierce anger. Isaiah, in the book of Isaiah, makes the statement that God did not create the earth tohu or in vain. But Genesis starts out saying that the earth was tohu, bobohu, or vain or void. So it's a very interesting theory, and when you really flesh it out, it seems to make sense why Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 read like they do. And in the English, it's not really apparent. It's really, when you go back to the Hebrew, you start to see that different words are used in different ways. In an English Bible, it says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters, or moved over the face of the water. But when you go back to the Hebrew, you have the word haya, which means became, or to become, or to be. The earth came to be without form and void. And the word darkness is choshek, and it can be translated misery, death, destruction, were upon the face of the abyss. And the Spirit of God fluttered, moved, or shook the face of the abyss. So you find a very strange statement, and then you also find that, when Jeremiah is having his vision, he's seeing things shaking. The hills are moving. The mountains are moving. God is mad, and the earth is without form and void, and it seems to, be dead on with the Genesis account. And then, again, I mentioned Isaiah. Isaiah, he says, I did not create the earth in vain. I created it to be inhabited. And so what you have is, to me, it seems like, starting from verse 3 in Genesis chapter 1, it seems to be a restoration of the earth versus the very first creation of it. The creation seems to take place in verse 1 with something happening in verse 2 and the restoration in verse 3. Now, even more interesting is when you read Isaiah 14, Jeremiah held that the fruitful place had become a wilderness. And if you read Isaiah 14, they when Satan is finally cast out of heaven, God is making a prophecy about a future event. He says, they that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee, saying, is this the man that made the nations, that did weaken the nations and made the earth into a wilderness?
Yes.
When did that happen? So you have Jeremiah seeing that the cities are broken down, the fruitful place has become a wilderness. Isaiah making a reference to, it being Satan's fault that the world became a wilderness. but when does that happen? That's, and it seems that the gap theory does fill in that. And I'm one of those people that, I do believe that the gap theory is possible. Now, whether it's, 100% accurate as far as, some of the ideas, I have no idea. But I do believe it makes sense when you study it in the Hebrew and put everything together. It all seems to fit together perfectly.
Absolutely. Personally, that's kind of my opinion, that maybe there was a pre-Adamic race down here for the wickedness. God wiped it out one time before. Maybe even God just pulled his presence back and it flash froze everything. And all of a sudden, it's plunged into darkness. You've got this instant deep freeze that some say they tend to see with some of these woolly mammoths just, found with, food still in their bellies. And you've got, they've taken core samples up there in the Arctic, and they go down, they find tropical plants underneath. And somebody even says that that area of Antarctic, they call it Lake Vostok. It's covering a landmass over there. I mean, all these interesting theories. I'm kind of thinking, yeah, maybe if God were to pull his presence back, he could flash freeze everything. Then he comes back on the scene, and he restores the light, and things start to melt. And, here we have the new creation. I mean, I can't prove that, folks, but it's very interesting. I'll tell you something else I've pondered is, have you ever looked into the word Rahab and the references to that in the Old Testament?
I believe are you referring to the woman in the Promised Land, or just the word in general?
Well, there's some references. I don't have the verse in front of me, but it's some have said it's a reference to a planet that God destroyed, and some believe it could be basically what we have now is known as the asteroid belt. And some believe that there was actually even another planet out there, that something was going on out there, and God just in his anger destroyed it and burst it into, smithereens. And you've got nothing but, rock fragments out there making up what is known as the asteroid belt. You've got these.
I haven't come across that. It's interesting, though, as you get into the New Age UFO circles, some of them refer to it as Planet Lucifer.
Really?
Which I found very interesting a while back. I never heard it, called under the name Rahab, but I had heard about Planet Lucifer being destroyed, and as you mentioned, it being part of the asteroid belt.
If you go into the Dake's Annotated Reference Bible, there's some border note over there, and Dake seemed to believe that the angels ruled the planet. I don't know what his basis for that is. You have these people saying that they see these pyramidal structures, even a sphinx structures that kind of look like the Giza Sphinx, up on Mars or the moon, and I often wonder, if actually there were some civilizations going on there.
Well, see, I'm of the opinion, I do share that opinion. I think there was an angelic civilization, and the reason I think that is because we don't know much about. We know some stuff about angels, but we don't know much about angels. We know they have a government. We know they have a hierarchy, a leadership, that sort of thing. But we don't know the circumstances that surrounded, Satan's fall. And I'm actually working on a novel that really, revolves around the fall of Satan in a fictional sense. And one of the things I speculate in the novel is that he had built cities on Earth and, other planets, and he had kind of let this go to his head almost as if he was God, and that's, what led to his downfall. Now, that's just something I speculate in the fictional series I'm working on. But I do believe that, at some point there may have been an angelic civilization here on Earth, which would explain also why Satan did what he did in the garden, because man had been given dominion over the earth, and it maybe once fell under the dominion of Satan. And again, that's just speculation, but I do believe it is a possibility that Satan and the other angels did have a civilization that may have existed here on Earth and the other planets.
Right on. I would agree with you on that. So back to the statement you made in the beginning, how you got involved in all this, and when you channeled one day it worked, and you were visited, but not by what you expected, but actually demonic spirits. Are you still afraid of the dark?
I feel uncomfortable in the dark. I wouldn't say I'm afraid. I can actually go in the dark, but if I'm asleep and it goes completely dark, I wake up. So I do have to sleep with the TV on just so I can't feel it. And again, that all came from that experience. After that experience changed me on a spiritual level. And it's hard to explain if somebody has never encountered that. But to go from, I guess you say, to not being able to feel the dark to being able to feel the dark, it's something altogether different. And it really, to me, I can better understand what was going on in Egypt because of, what I've gone through and the fact that I can feel the dark. I can really understand what they were going through in Egypt, where it says that they can feel the dark. And God talks about where does darkness go? So it seems that darkness is not just I guess you say the absence of light, but it seems to be something else altogether different. It has a place that it goes to, in the presence of light. And that's found in, Job chapter 38, where God talks about where's the place of darkness. So yeah, I do still have this, I guess you say, aversion to being in the dark. I'm not necessarily scared of the dark.
What advice do you have to people that would want to try to channel these UFOs and invite them?
I say don't. They're not what they claim to be. And I mean, you could really end up dealing with something and you really have no idea what you're getting into until you do it. And really it's a sense of fear that takes over you. For example, even Whitley Strieber, who's a well-known atheist, he proposed at one point that they might be demons. And so, I mean, when an atheist jumps from complete atheism to these might be demons, that's a huge leap. I mean, that automatically assumes God and angels and, everything else for them to, be demons. So I definitely advise against attempting to channel or communicate with these beings in any way at all.
Absolutely, folks. I mean, it's all about deception. Satan deceives man. He wants you to think that we were seated on this earth, and these are our friends or our brothers, and they're trying to come back and save us. And that's all part of the deception and the lie. And Satan has come down, and he can transform himself into an angel of light, and it could appear as anything you wanted, probably, including a spaceman if that's what you were looking for, or these grays. And the point is it's a deception. And when you welcome these in, or you try to contact them, as some of our other guests have shared testimonies where they actually made contact with them and they were training with them, and they would just go missing and couldn't account for time, and they'd be molested. Folks, this is real. You invite these things in, they will come in. You break the hedge of protection that God has put around you, and once you get them, you're going to have a hard time getting rid of them. They're actually looking to inhabit your body if they can be invited in, and so you've got to understand these for what they are. They are demonic spirits, fallen entities. You've got two forces. You've got God and you've got Satan. And, Satan wants to deceive you and have you chasing after these things. And, it's ultimately going to be your destruction if you don't come to the knowledge of what it is and repent and command these things to go. Dante, when is your book going to be coming out? For those just tuning in?
August 27th this year. And I will actually be debuting it at the Omega Hour conference that we're having out here August 27th and 28th.
Oh, tell us about that. Where's that going to be located at?
That will be located here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Again, August 27th through the 28th. It will be from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. It will be myself, Connie Huff, Andrew Hoffman, L.A. Marzulli, and Russ Bizdar will be the speakers. And you can actually find information by going to my website, ministerfortson.com, or you can go directly to the conference page, ministerfortson.com /Omega Conference. And you can actually pull up all the information on the conference, but it will be here in Las Vegas.
We've got about 7 minutes remaining. Let me ask you another question. You are in Las Vegas. Have you ever taken a trip out to Area 51 area? Try to get up there to that gate?
No, I haven't. Actually, there's so much stuff that goes on here in the city, it's really not necessary. Lately, probably for the last few months, there have been these strange lights that suddenly appear over the strip in weird formations, and they blink out, and they'll blink out, and then another one will blink in a good distance from it, and then that light that you saw blink in will move back into position where the other one was, which leads me to believe is, you know, the same light moving super fast, or, you know, teleporting or whatever it may be doing. And what's interesting is that none of this stuff is really being reported in detail. And I've been online. I found a few reports, you know, in the same time frame in which I was starting to see these things. And one thing I've realized as I've gone through different parts of the city is that towards the northwestern part of the city is where you can get the best view of these lights. And it seems that if you move, you can't really get as good of a view. And I noticed this because I lived in the northwest part of the city, as you know, up until June. And I would see these lights every day, me and my girlfriend, and we would look at these lights. And I told her, you know, something weird about those lights over the strip, because they would be there every single night. And if you move down towards the strip and get on the freeway, you weren't at a position where you could see them. If you actually got on the strip, you couldn't see them. But as you went farther back, if you started to see these lights, you would notice that they're not over the strip. They're actually much farther, but they were so bright that they looked like they're right over the strip, and they would just sit there. They wouldn't move, which made it very strange. And I remember the incident when they first appeared. I was picking my friend up from the airport. Myself, my girlfriend, and him were in the car. And I remember I purposely didn't say anything to him about what was going on, and we were leaving McCarran Airport, and he saw one of the lights coming towards us. He said, "What is that?" And I said, "I don't know." And he had his window down. I had my window down, and traffic was just backed up. And he's looking out the window. He was like, "That's not a helicopter. I don't hear nothing." And I told him, I said, they've been there for a while, for like the last hour or so. And this thing came at us, and then all of a sudden it did a 90-degree angle turn. This thing was flying super low and took off. And I mean, it zipped off, no sound, and there was about 3 or 4 car accidents. People were just looking at this thing, and nobody, I guess, reported it, or either it got taken down. I'm not sure what happened. But there were 3 or 4 car accidents. Even officers were just looking at this thing that flew. It was probably only 20 or 30 feet above the cars. It was small, and it just turned at a 90-degree angle turn and took off. And so that's just, one of the incidents that's been going on within the city. And we've been seeing these lights pop up. 4th of July, for instance, there was a light here just, it looked like it was just above Rancho and Cary. And it was sitting there for a while, and then for about an hour, and then it moved, and it just sat there for another 2 or 3 hours after it moved. So these aren't helicopters floating in place. Whatever they are, they seem to just be watching. And so this is something I find weird going on. So I really haven't had too much of a need to try to go to Area 51. There's enough stuff going on right here.
Wow. Hey, speaking of Nevada, any information on whether or not Art Bell is back in the state, back in Pahrump? You ever been up to that part of Nevada?
I have no idea. I haven't. Actually, I've been up to Pahrump. I don't know Art Bell personally or anything, so I have no idea if he's, back in the state. I heard he was
back in the States from the Philippines, but I wasn't sure if he lived back in the Pahrump area. If you've been tuning in tonight, you're listening to Omega Man Radio Network. We have on Dante Fortson, author of The Sons of God and the Coming Apocalypse, which he'll be releasing in the next 2 weeks. I would encourage you to order that from him. Dante, give out your website again and tell people how they can tune in to the program that you're doing every week.
Okay. My website, www.ministerfortson.com. You can reach me there. That's, really the main contact point for everything I do. The web show, or the talk show I do, is the Omega Hour. It comes on every Thursday nights from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on Blog Talk Radio. And for those of you who are free during the day, I host another show called How to Hunt the Supernatural, which is on the Freedomizer Radio Network here on Blog Talk. If you look up Freedomizer, you'll find it. It's from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and that's Pacific Standard Time. So if you do have an interest in the supernatural, I'm on 4 days a week. You can catch me from 8 to 10 p.m. on Thursdays, or 1 to 3 p.m. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Okay, so they can contact you through those websites. Also, give out the dates again of the conference that you're going to be having in Nevada.
All right, the conference is August 27th and the 28th. They start at 10 a.m. and run until 8 p.m., And again, it'll be myself, Connie Huff, Andrew Hoffman, L.A. Marzulli, and Russ Dizdar.
Oh, wow, that'll be an interesting conference. That'll be right there in Las Vegas?
Yes, it will.
Okay, and lastly, do you have, are you on Facebook? Do you have a contact over there?
Yeah, Facebook, just look up Minister Fortson, and it should pull me right up. Yeah, that's the only Facebook page I have. So, yeah, if you just pull up Minister Fortson, you'll be able to contact me there on MySpace or Twitter. Everything is Minister Fortson.
Fantastic. Dante, thank you for coming on the show tonight. May God bless you, and I look forward to your book coming out. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. God bless you.
You've been listening to Omega Man Radio Network. We've had Dante Fortson on tonight. I want to thank you for tuning in. We're going to have several great guests lined up this week. Make sure that you tell a friend, tune back into Omega Man Radio. We're going to have Peter Kulin on tomorrow night from Sweden. We'll be doing 3 shows with him, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I'll have the Elijah Challenge on, William Lau this week, Brother Al Cuppett. And the Omega Man is going to be special guest on the Steve Quell Show. I'm going to be on Steve Quell Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be talking about deliverance. So thank you for tuning in, and may the Lord richly bless you.